Harmony Gulch and the desert sky. Harmony Gulch gripped the arid land like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Whirlwinds pirouette through the rutted lanes, scattering sharp motes that settled like rust on every surface. Buildings sagged, their facades flaking off in brittle layers. The most imposing structure was the Golden Spur Saloon, its bat-wing doors constantly flapping, releasing bursts of piano music and the brawling tones of inebriated gamblers. The town was a relic, its glory days relegated to the boastful yarns of sun-baked codgers who populated the general store's porch, their gazes distant with reminiscence and regret. The silver boom had long since gone bust, leaving only shattered hopes and a bitter aftertaste. Esmeralda S.E. Florist descended from the stagecoach, her battered valise secured in a white-knuckled grip. The sun at its zenith hammered down, and the air rasped at her throat. She smoothed the fabric of her violet dress, a vibrant splash against the monochrome landscape, striving to ignore the scrutinizing stares. Harmony Gulch hadn't seen a newcomer in many months, especially not a woman traveling solo. And a woman like Essie, with her obsidian braid, sculpted cheekbones, and eyes that mirrored both fragility and resolve, was an anomaly in this enclave of weathered visages and coarse hands. She'd arrived to claim her inheritance, a modest plot of land, a dilapidated farmhouse, and a legacy she questioned embracing. Her deceased husband, Matteo, had painted Harmony Gulch with a brush of nostalgia, describing golden harvests, sunsets blazing across the firmament, and a community extending open arms. Reality offered a bleak contrast to his idealized recollections. The stagecoach driver, a thick-set man sporting a walrus mustache, expectorated a stream of tobacco juice onto the parched earth. Flora's place is about 3 miles east, he rumbled, gesturing with his whip. Can't miss it. Looks like a stiff breeze could knock it over. Essie mustered a wan smile. Thank you. She engaged a boy, barely 10 years old, his face a constellation of freckles, his eyes mirroring the same wary curiosity as the adults, to carry her valise. As they headed toward the town's edge, whispers trailed them like shadows. That's Matteo, Flora's widow. Heard he met with some misfortune. She looks out of place. Essie lowered her gaze, focusing on the uneven terrain. She understood their unspoken sentiments. A woman alone, attempting to cultivate a farm in a place like Harmony Gulch, a surefire path to ruin. But she lacked alternatives. Matteo had been her sole kin, and this land, however desolate, represented his remaining legacy. The farmhouse proved even more ramshackle than anticipated. The porch listed to one side, the windows were sealed with planks, and the paint had long since surrendered, exposing the bare, time-beaten wood beneath. The surrounding fields were choked with weeds, a testament to years of neglect and hardship. The boy deposited her valise with a muffled thump. That'll be a dime, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Essie rummaged in her purse, tendering the coin. He snatched it and darted away, disappearing back toward town. Essie stood alone, the silence broken only by the desolate cry of a hawk spiraling overhead. She inhaled deeply, the arid air prickling her nostrils. This was it. This was her new existence. As she pushed open the protesting front door, a cloud of dust erupted, triggering a fit of coughing. The interior was dim and stale, the air heavy with the odor of decay. Cobwebs draped every corner, and the floorboards shrieked under her weight. She devoted the remainder of the day to cleaning, scouring, and ventilating the house. She located a broom in the shed and swept away the accumulated layers of grime. She removed the planks from the windows, allowing the harsh sunlight to flood in, revealing the full extent of the decay. As twilight descended, painting the desert sky in hues of ochre, rose, and amethyst, Essie settled on the porch, weary but strangely at peace. She had managed to render the house habitable, at least for the night. She had discovered a few tins of beans in the pantry, sufficient for a meager supper. The splendor of the sunset was breathtaking, a stark juxtaposition to the squalor of the town and the severity of her circumstances. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fading sun alleviate her aching muscles. But even in that rare moment of serenity, she couldn't dispel the sensation of being observed. She opened her eyes and surveyed the horizon. In the distance, she discerned figures silhouetted against the incandescent sky. They were watching her. Apprehension gnawed at her, but she refused to succumb to it. She had journeyed to Harmony Gulch to forge a life for herself, and she wouldn't be intimidated by whispers and stares. She would confront whatever challenges lay ahead with fortitude and resolve. She straightened her posture, her chin lifted defiantly, and returned the gaze of the distant figures. Let them watch. Let them whisper. She was Esmeralda Flores, and she was there to stay. The desert sky stretched vast and implacable, but beneath its watchful expanse, she would unearth her own strength, her own purpose. Shadows of envy. The Harmony Gulch Mercantile was a cauldron of simmering resentment, and Agnes Butterfield was the spoon stirring the pot. Imagine, she clucked, her voice carrying across the crowded store, strutting in here like she owns the place, that city woman, inheriting poor old Caleb's farm after barely knowing him, while his own kin are left with naught but memories. A murmur rippled through the shoppers, a mixture of agreement and hesitant disapproval. Agnes, emboldened, pressed on, probably just after the land. Sell it off to some mining company and disappear with the profits, leaving us all in the dust. Caleb would be turning in his grave. Essie, who had been carefully selecting flour at the far end of the aisle, felt the prickle of eyes on her back. She straightened her shoulders, ignoring the whispers, and continued her shopping. She needed nails, too, and seed. The garden was a priority. Later, as she trudged back toward the dilapidated farmhouse, the setting sun casting long, skeletal shadows across the barren fields, she noticed something was amiss. The flimsy fence around the livestock pen had been torn down in several places, the splintered wood a raw testament to deliberate destruction. Panic seized her. She quickened her pace, her heart hammering against her ribs. The chickens were scattered, clucking frantically, and the lone goat, Beatrice, was nowhere to be seen. Essie frantically scanned the surrounding fields, calling Beatrice's name until her voice was hoarse. Finally, she spotted the goat near the creek, its usually placid eyes wide with terror. As Essie approached, she saw why. A group of boys, no older than 12, were throwing rocks at the animal, their faces alight with cruel glee. "Hey!" Essie shouted, her voice trembling with anger. "Stop it! Leave her alone." The boys, startled, turned to face her. They recognized the city woman. A sneer twisted the face of the apparent ringleader. "She's just a dumb old goat," he said, throwing another rock that landed harmlessly in the water. "And you shouldn't be here." Essie marched toward them, her fists clenched. "Get off my property. Now." The boys hesitated, then, with a final defiant glare, scrambled away, disappearing into the growing darkness. Essie knelt beside Beatrice, stroking her trembling flank. "It's okay, girl," she murmured. "It's okay now." As she led Beatrice back to the makeshift pen, she felt a chilling sense of isolation. This wasn't just about a broken fence or a spooked goat. This was a deliberate act of intimidation, a message loud and clear. She wasn't welcome here. From the shadows of the old oak tree that marked the edge of her property, Hemlock Stone watched the scene unfold. His face, usually etched with lines of stoic indifference, was now a mask of grim disapproval. He'd seen the boys, recognized them as the offspring of some of the most vocal detractors of the new widow. He'd heard Agnes Butterfield's poisonous pronouncements echoing in the mercantile. He knew exactly what was happening. He observed Essie as she repaired the fence with grim determination, her small frame silhouetted against the fading light. He saw the weariness in her movements, the flicker of fear in her eyes. But he also saw something else, a stubborn spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Hemlock remained hidden in the shadows, his presence undetected. He made no move to intervene, offered no word of comfort. But as he turned and disappeared back into the darkness, a decision hardened in his heart. He would watch, he would observe, and he would decide whether this woman was worth protecting. And if she was, he would become a force more formidable than anything Harmony Gulch had ever seen. The whispers of ill intention that had been so prevalent now began to coalesce around a single target: Esmeralda. A stirring in stone. The waning sun bled long shadows across the fallow fields as Essie fought with a length of shattered fence. Jagged barbs of rusted wire raked her gloved palms, each broken strand a testament to the farm's unraveling. She heaved, cursing under her breath, then strained again, sweat beading at her hairline, darkening the tendrils clinging to her brow. Every chore felt like a skirmish against the land, against encroaching neglect, and against an unseen malice pressing her to abandon this place. Earlier, the well had yielded a noxious surprise, a bilious green film slicking its surface. Now, with twilight descending, the fence remained an obstinate ruin. A frustrated growl vibrated in her throat, laced with raw defiance. She would mend it. She would reclaim it all. From his accustomed perch atop the ridge overlooking the neglected florist land, Hemlock Stone kept vigil. The breeze carried the perfume of honeysuckle, mingled with something sharper, the keen edge of desperation rising from the figure toiling below. He'd marked her struggles all week: shattered panes, slashed tires, the vile message daubed on the barn: "City girl, get out." Each act of spiteful vandalism eroded the steel in her spine, yet she endured. He shifted, the coarse weave of his coat a rasp against his skin. The sunset painted the valley in strokes of fire and violet, a breathtaking panorama tainted by the petty malevolence playing out beneath it. He recalled another sunset, years gone, the sky ablaze as his own world dissolved in flames. The conflagration had devoured everything: his wife, his daughter, his very reason. He'd rebuilt his ranch, stone by grueling stone, but the blaze had forged an implacable core within him, a vow never to expose himself to such vulnerability again. He'd erected barricades around his heart, higher than the fieldstone walls that defined his property. He remained aloof from town squabbles. He offered no assistance. He felt nothing. At least, that's what he repeated as a mantra. But observing Essie Flores, something flickered within him. Not simple pity. That was an indulgence he'd long ago excised. It was recognition. He saw in her struggle an echo of his own protracted, solitary war against despair. He perceived a tenacious ember that refused to be quenched, an unyielding refusal to yield. He remembered Agnes Butterfield at the town meeting, her voice dripping poison as she denounced Essie's newfangled ways and her contempt for Harmony Gulch's time-honored traditions. He'd stayed silent, as always, but the venomous current had been unmistakable. Agnes held considerable sway, a matriarch born and bred in Harmony Gulch, her roots entwined with the very soil. Outsiders were anathema, especially those who dared to challenge the established order. Essie Flores, with her progressive notions and her ambition to breathe life back into the derelict farm, represented such a threat. A coyote howled distantly, its plaintive cry resonating through the valley. Hemlock watched as Essie finally wrestled the broken wire into place. She straightened, hands braced on her hips, assessing her handiwork. Even from that distance, he could discern the fatigue etched in her posture, the slump of her shoulders. Yet, there was something else there too, a quiet satisfaction, a hard-won victory. He clenched his jaw. The town's actions were beyond the pale. He might have ignored childish pranks, but the escalating hostility was unnerving. The tainted well crossed a line. Someone could be gravely harmed. He thought of Lily. She would be about Essie's age now. Lily had possessed that same indomitable spirit, that unwavering faith in a brighter future. The memory, typically a source of aching sorrow, now ignited a different kind of fire within him. He rose to his feet. The sun had almost vanished behind the mountain peaks, bathing the valley in a soft, spectral light. He paused, his hand hovering near the rifle he habitually carried. It wasn't necessary. Not yet. He simply needed to observe. He began his descent down the ridge, his boots crunching on the parched earth. He wasn't certain of his next move, but he knew he could no longer remain a passive spectator. The tectonic plates of stone's resolve had begun to shift, and when stone moved, nothing could stand in its path. Cornered in the square, the midday sun beat down on Harmony Gulch, baking the dust of the town square into a gritty haze. Essie hurried across it, the worn leather of her satchel digging into her shoulder. She needed feed for the chickens, the last of their meager laying hens. The vandalism had escalated this week. Someone had let the birds loose, and she'd spent half the morning coaxing them back into the coop, only to find their feeder smashed to pieces. As she neared the general store, a knot of townsfolk coalesced in front of her, blocking her path. Agnes Butterfield stood at the fore, her face tight with disapproval. Behind her, the usual suspects, Earl, the blacksmith, Martha, the baker, and a handful of others, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and malice. Essie stopped, her heart quickening. "Excuse me," she said, her voice wavering slightly. Aggie didn't budge. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Thought you'd have packed your bags by now, girl. I just need to get some feed." Essie tried to step around the group, but they shifted, keeping her boxed in. "Feed, is it?" Aggie's voice dripped with saccharine mockery. "Seems a shame to waste good feed on animals that'll probably just wander off again. Accidents happen, you know." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Essie's hands tightened on the strap of her satchel. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a flush of anger battling with a tremor of fear. "Leave me alone, Aggie." "Or what? You gonna sick your chickens on us?" Aggie let out a harsh, grating laugh, and the others joined in, their voices echoing in the square. "You're not wanted here, Esmeralda." Martha chimed in, her face pinched. "This is our town, our home. You don't belong." The words stung, sharper than any thrown stone. Essie lifted her chin, trying to project an air of defiance she didn't feel. "This land is mine," she said, her voice stronger now. "My grandfather left it to me, and he should have left it to someone who cares about it." Aggie spat. "Someone who respects the traditions of Harmony Gulch." Earl stepped forward, his thick arms crossed. "Tradition means something here, girl. We don't take kindly to outsiders coming in and stirring things up." The circle tightened. Essie could smell the sweat and dust on their clothes, the acrid scent of resentment hanging in the air. She felt a surge of panic, a primal urge to run. "Just let me go." Her voice was barely a whisper. Aggie took another step closer, her eyes glinting. "Maybe we need to teach you a lesson about respect, Esmeralda. A lesson about knowing your place." She reached out, her hand outstretched, and Essie flinched, bracing herself for the blow. But never came. The sound of approaching hooves shattered the tense silence. A hush fell over the crowd as a dark figure on horseback rode into the square. Hemlock Stone, his face grim, his eyes narrowed. His presence was a palpable force, a shadow falling over the sun-drenched scene. He reined in his horse, the animal's powerful muscles bunching beneath its glossy coat. The horse snorted, its breath misting in the air. Hemlock surveyed the scene, his gaze sweeping over the assembled townsfolk, lingering for a moment on Aggie's face. "What's going on here?" His voice was low, gravelly, but it carried an unmistakable edge of authority. Aggie sputtered, momentarily taken aback. "Hemlock, we were just having a conversation with Miss Flores." A conversation that looked suspiciously like intimidation. Hemlock's eyes remained fixed on Aggie. "I suggest you all find something better to do with your time." He dismounted, his movements fluid and deliberate. He walked towards Essie, his boots kicking up puffs of dust. He didn't look at her directly, but the gesture was clear. He was standing between her and the mob. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the nervous shuffling of the crowd. Essie swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Yes," she managed to say. "Thank you." Hemlock turned back to the townsfolk, his expression unwavering. "This ends now," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet menace. "Leave her alone." The crowd hesitated, their bravado deflating under his steely gaze. One by one, they began to disperse, muttering excuses and casting furtive glances at Essie. Aggie was the last to leave, her face a mask of fury. She shot Essie a venomous look before stalking away, her footsteps heavy on the dusty ground. Hemlock watched them go, then turned his attention back to Essie. He studied her for a moment, his eyes searching. "You need to be careful," he said. "They won't stop easily." An unexpected proposal. The dust hadn't even settled. The silence, thick with unspoken threats and simmering resentment, felt heavier than the midday sun. Aggie Butterfield stood frozen, her mouth agape like a landed fish. Her cronies mirrored her shock, their faces pale and slack. Hemlock Stone remained impassive, his gaze unwavering, fixed solely on Essie. His presence was a bulwark against the animosity, a solid, unyielding thing. Essie, however, felt the ground tilting beneath her. The adrenaline that had coursed through her veins only moments before was now replaced by a dizzying confusion. She blinked, trying to clear her head, to make sense of the impossible. "Miss Flores," Hemlock began, his voice resonating through the stunned silence, each word deliberate, a hammer blow against the oppressive atmosphere. "I have observed the difficulties you have encountered since your arrival in Harmony Gulch." He paused, his eyes sweeping briefly over the assembled townsfolk, a silent challenge daring anyone to contradict him. No one dared. "I have also observed your fortitude," he continued, turning back to Essie, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "Your resilience, and your need." Essie's breath hitched. Need? What did he know of her needs? She hadn't voiced them to a soul, had barely even acknowledged them to herself. "Therefore," Hemlock declared, his voice ringing with a finality that brooked no argument, "I propose marriage." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A fly buzzed lazily near Aggie's head, but she didn't swat it away. She didn't seem to notice. Essie stared at Hemlock, her mind a blank canvas. Marriage? To him, a man she barely knew, a man who exuded an aura of forbidding strength and impenetrable solitude? He was handsome, yes, ruggedly so, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of years spent battling the elements. And there was something undeniably compelling about his quiet intensity. But marriage? It was ludicrous. Impossible. "Mr. Stone," she stammered, finding her voice with difficulty. I don't understand." "It is quite simple, Miss Flores," he replied, his tone devoid of any emotion. "A practical arrangement. You require protection. I require a wife." His words were like shards of ice, cold and sharp. Practical? Was that all this was? A business transaction? A way to solve both their problems with a single, swift stroke? Aggie Butterfield found her voice first, a strangled squawk that broke the tension. "Hemlock Stone, have you lost your mind?" He didn't even glance in her direction. His attention remained solely on Essie. "This is my decision, Agnes, and none of your concern." Other voices began to rise, a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. The carefully constructed facade of Harmony Gulch was crumbling, revealing the raw, ugly prejudice that lay beneath. "He's just doing it to spite us," someone yelled from the back of the crowd. "She's a gold digger. That's what she is," another voice shrieked. The air crackled with hostility, but Essie barely registered it. She was too consumed by the man standing before her, offering her a lifeline wrapped in barbed wire. "Mr. Stone," she said again, her voice trembling slightly, "I appreciate your offer, but I can't possibly." "Consider it, Miss Flores," Hemlock interrupted, his gaze softening imperceptibly. "I will give you time, but understand this. The animosity you face here will not simply disappear. It will fester and grow. I offer you a way out, a way to secure your future. And," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "a way to make them pay." He nodded curtly, then turned and strode towards his horse, leaving Essie standing in the dust, surrounded by the simmering hatred of Harmony Gulch and the weight of an impossible proposal. The crowd parted for him, fear still held in their eyes. He mounted his horse, and with a final look at Essie, rode away. Aggie Butterfield rounded on Essie, her face contorted with rage. You think you've won, don't you? You think you've charmed Hemlock Stone, and now you're safe? You're wrong, girl. Dead wrong. This ain't over. Not by a long shot. A promise of protection. A thick silence settled, heavier than the motes dancing in the mercantile's lamplight. Essie met Hemlock Stone's gaze, his craggy face an enigma, his eyes like shards of obsidian. Marriage? The word echoed strangely, an alien concept, a fragile spar offered in a turbulent sea. Mr. Stone, she began, her voice a thread, I can't see my way clear to it. Hemlock remained unperturbed, an unyielding presence against the rising tide of Harmony Gulch's scorn. Cannot see your way clear, Miss Flores? Or cannot abide the notion of being shackled to a man such as myself? Essie recoiled slightly at his bluntness. It's not personal, sir. It's everything closing in. I am barely settled. Marriage, that's a monumental commitment. Settled you are not, Hemlock retorted, his voice a low rumble. You are mired. Some grand leaps, however, become vital to escape a precipice. With a subtle inclination of his head, he recalled the direction of Aggie Butterfield's residence, a tacit reminder of the opposition facing her. Essie hugged herself, a sudden coldness gripping her despite the room's stuffiness. I appreciate the gesture, truly, but a wed simply for expediency feels wrong. Hemlock's lips tightened into a grim line. Expediency serves both our purposes, Miss Flores. Do not imagine I am offering mere altruism. I stand to benefit as well. A surprised lift of Essie's brow. And what gain is that, Mr. Stone? What could you possibly derive from wedding a someone so shunned? He hesitated, his gaze briefly touching the worn floorboards before locking with hers once more. A wife. A woman to oversee the household, manage the staff, provide company. The final words seemed dredged from the depths. Company, Essie echoed, a mirthless sound escaping her. Hardly the most ardent proposal I've entertained. Ardor is a currency neither of us possesses, Hemlock declared, his tone devoid of warmth. I offer you sanctuary, Miss Flores, from Aggie Butterfield, from this community. A roof, sustenance, the shield of my name. Am I offering, Mr. Stone? Essie probed, skepticism coloring her voice. Beyond relieving your solitary state? Credibility, he countered, his gaze unwavering. A reason to re-engage. I have existed in shadow too long. Perhaps you can rekindle the flame of life within me. The bare honesty in his words momentarily stunned her. She'd envisioned him as a withdrawn figure, driven purely by obligation. Yet, beneath the surface, something else flickered, a lost ember. Essie turned away, seeking the window and the encroaching darkness. The shadows seemed to contort and dance, mirroring the inner chaos. She could persevere on this path, battling fiercely for every scrap of ground, enduring the relentless spite, the murmurs, the accusatory stares. Or she could seize Hemlock Stone's proposition, a bastion against the tempest, a chance to rebuild on firmer foundations. But at what forfeiture? A union with a man who offered protection, but not fondness, security, but not devotion. A transaction, a cold contract cloaked in matrimony. Was she prepared to relinquish her yearning for genuine connection merely to survive? She pictured the crumbling farmhouse, the neglected acreage, the unending toil that awaited. She pictured Aggie Butterfield's poisonous glare, the town's collective ostracism, the pervasive sensation of being an unwelcome stranger. A shiver tracked down her spine. I require time, Mr. Stone, she announced, turning back to face him. This is overwhelming. I need to consider it. Hemlock gave a curt nod, his face unreadable. Take what you need, Miss Flores, but do not tarry excessively. The storm gathers. He turned and moved toward the door, his form outlined by the failing light. He paused at the threshold. One thing more, Esmeralda. He breathed her first name into the room, a subtle offering. I assure you, No one will dare harm you again. Then, he was gone, leaving Essie in the encroaching gloom, the gravity of her choice a crushing weight. The promise of safe harbor, issued in the heart of a hostile place, felt both like a saving grace and a yoke, and she remained uncertain which it would ultimately be. Kindness takes root. The question hung in the air, thick and heavy as the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. Essie looked at Hemlock Stone, really looked at him, past the weathered lines etched deep into his face, past the gruffness that seemed to be his default setting. She saw something there, a flicker of loneliness, perhaps even a hint of vulnerability. I accept, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Relief, stark and undeniable, washed over Hemlock's features. He nodded once, a curt, almost formal gesture. Good. We'll speak with the preacher tomorrow. That night, sleep evaded Essie. Doubts gnawed at her. Was she selling herself short? Was this just another form of survival? A gilded cage instead of tumble-down shack? Yet, interlaced with the worry was a strange sense of anticipation. A chance, perhaps, to build something more. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a deceptive mask over the simmering animosity of Harmony Gulch. Hemlock was as good as his word. By noon, the preacher, a portly man with perpetually damp hands, had mumbled his way through the ceremony in Essie's parlor. Agnes Butterfield, predictably, was in attendance, her face a study in soured disapproval. You'll regret this, girl, she hissed as Essie passed. Mark my words. Essie ignored her, focusing on Hemlock's steady presence beside her. He didn't offer a comforting word or gesture, but his nearness was enough. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Hemlock, surprisingly adept with his hands, began tackling the repairs on the farm with a grim determination. The barn, threatening to collapse, received new supports. The leaking roof was patched. The overgrown fields were plowed, revealing fertile soil beneath the weeds. Essie worked alongside him, her initial awkwardness fading with each shared task. She learned to wield a hammer, her blisters a badge of honor. Hemlock, in turn, showed her how to coax life back into the neglected orchard. One evening, as they sat on the porch, sharing a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Hemlock spoke of his ranch, of the cattle he raised, of the vast expanse of land that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was the most he'd said at one time since she'd met him. It's a lonely life, he admitted, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Too much time spent with my own thoughts. Essie understood. She, too, knew the weight of solitude. It doesn't have to be, she said softly. The town's animosity didn't disappear overnight, but it did lessen. Hemlock's presence, his quiet authority, seemed to act as a buffer. He stood beside her when she went to the general store, his silence more intimidating than any shouted threat. He fixed a glare on the men who leered at her, their bravado vanishing under his gaze. One afternoon, while Essie was tending her garden, a group of children, egged on by Agnes's grandson, began pelting her with rocks. Hemlock, who had been working on the barn, saw what was happening. With a roar that startled even Essie, he charged towards them. The children scattered like quail, the half-eaten apple in Agnes's grandson's hand falling to the dirt. Hemlock didn't say a word to Essie. He simply returned to his work, but she saw the concern etched on his face. That night, he brought her a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a robin, he said, that he'd whittled years ago. To watch over your garden, he mumbled, handing it to her. That night, after dinner, Essie told Hemlock about her life before Harmony Gulch, about her dreams of becoming a teacher, about the husband she had lost too soon. He listened, his gaze unwavering. When she finished, he simply nodded, acknowledging her pain. Everyone has a story, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Some are just harder to tell than others. As the days turned into weeks, a fragile connection began to grow between them. It wasn't the passionate love she had once dreamed of, but it was something real, something solid. It was built on shared labor, on quiet understanding, on the small acts of kindness that bloomed in the desolate landscape of their lives. Kindness had taken root, and in its slow, steady growth, Essie saw the promise of something more than just survival. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could find happiness in Harmony Gulch after all. Sabotage and stampede. The air in Harmony Gulch crackled, not with wedding cheer, but with a simmering malice. Agnes Butterfield, perched on an overturned crate outside the general store, fanned herself with a hymnal, her eyes like chips of flint as she surveyed the street. A florist marrying a stone, she hissed to the small gaggle of townsfolk huddled around her. It's an abomination. Ephraim Peabody, the blacksmith, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Stone's always been a loner. Now he's gone and lost his mind. Lost his mind, and probably his fortune, Aggie corrected, a glint in her eye. She's after his land, mark my words. That little foreigner. A younger woman, Martha, wrung her hands. But a stampede? Isn't that dangerous? Aggie rounded on her, her voice sharp. Dangerous is letting that woman worm her way into our town, stealing what's rightfully ours. Besides, she added with a sly smile, nobody needs to get hurt. Just a little scare. A reminder that she's not wanted here. The plan, hatched over stale coffee and whispered anxieties, was simple. During the hastily arranged ceremony at the church, several of the men would release a herd of cattle from the holding pens on the outskirts of town. The ensuing chaos would, they hoped, send Essie Flores packing, leaving Hemlock Stone to his solitude and their town to its familiar, if stagnant, ways. The day dawned bright and deceptively peaceful. Essie, dressed in a simple blue dress she'd managed to salvage from her meager wardrobe, stood beside Hemlock in the small, sparsely decorated church. The justice of the peace, a weary-looking man named Mr. Abernathy, droned through the vows. Hemlock's hand, calloused and strong, felt like an anchor in hers. He smelled of leather and hay, a comforting scent that grounded her amidst the swirling uncertainty. Outside, the air thrummed with a low, ominous vibration. The ground seemed to hum beneath their feet. Hemlock's head snapped up, his gaze hardening. He knew that sound. He'd lived his whole life in the gulch, and he knew what was brewing. Now, before I pronounce you, Mr. Abernathy began, but Hemlock cut him off. Stampede, he said, his voice low and urgent. He gripped Essie's hand tighter. Get down. Even as the words left his mouth, the thunder of hooves erupted, shaking the church to its foundations. The windows rattled, and dust rained down from the ceiling. The wedding party erupted into chaos. Essie, surprisingly calm, met Hemlock's gaze. Where? Holding pens, Hemlock said grimly. They're headed straight for town. He didn't wait for a response. He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the back of the church, away from the panicked crowd. We need to get to high ground, and we need a plan. They burst out the back door of the church just as the first of the cattle thundered into the street, a surging mass of horns and muscle and panicked bellowing. People screamed and scattered, diving for cover behind wagons and storefronts. Essie, her mind racing, spotted the old water tower on the edge of town. The tower, she yelled over the din, we can use the runoff ditch. Hemlock understood instantly. The runoff ditch, designed to divert excess water from the tower's reservoir, ran along the western edge of town. If they could somehow redirect the herd towards it. Come on, he shouted, pulling her towards his truck parked nearby. He fired the engine, the roar of the motor momentarily drowning out the sound of the stampede. He steered the truck onto the dusty road, dodging panicked townsfolk and careening cattle. Reaching the holding pens, they saw two men scrambling away, their faces flushed with a mixture of fear and triumph. Hemlock didn't have time to deal with them now. He slammed the truck into park and grabbed a coil of rope from the back. I need you to be quick, he said to Essie, his eyes intense. Can you do this? Essie nodded, her jaw set. Just tell me what to do. Hemlock quickly explained his plan. Essie, surprisingly agile, climbed onto the roof of the truck. As the stampede approached, she began to unfurl the rope, creating a makeshift barrier. Hemlock, meanwhile, raced along the edge of the ditch, firing his rifle into the air, trying to startle the cattle towards the open channel. It was a chaotic dance of desperation and calculated risk. The lead steers, confused and panicked, hesitated at the rope. The sound of Hemlock's rifle, combined with Essie's frantic waving, proved just enough. One by one, then in small groups, the cattle began to veer towards the runoff ditch. The ground trembled as the herd surged past, a churning river of brown and white. The ditch, wider and deeper than it appeared, swallowed the cattle, diverting them away from the heart of Harmony Gulch. Finally, the last of the cattle thundered past. The dust settled, leaving behind a scene of stunned silence. People emerged from their hiding places, their faces pale. Hemlock and Essie stood beside the truck, breathing heavily, watching as the cattle gradually dispersed into the open fields. The air still thrummed with residual energy, but the danger had passed. Aggie Butterfield watched from the shadows, her face a mask of fury. Her plan had failed, and somehow that woman, that Flores woman, had saved them all. Harmony restored. The dust settled like a shroud, leaving a gritty ochre residue on every surface. A miasma of scared livestock and upturned soil hung in the air, gradually thinning. Leaning against Hemlock, Essie felt a tremor run through her, a cocktail of lingering fear and residual adrenaline. Across the ravaged field, the residents of Harmony Gulch remained still, a living portrait of collective shame and disbelief. Agnes Butterfield's complexion was a furious, mottled crimson, radiating her inner turmoil. Silence reigned, broken only by the mournful bellows of the cattle, now subdued within the hastily constructed earthen perimeter. Then, Old Man Fitzwilliam, his spine as bent as a wind-battered juniper, hobbled forward. Removing his weathered hat to reveal a balding scalp speckled with age, he rasped, the sound amplified in the stillness. "Hemlock," he began, his voice surprisingly resonant, "Esmeralda, we owe you both a debt." A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd, heads nodding in somber agreement, faces etched with regret. Even Jebediah Butterfield, Agnes's son, fidgeted, his discomfort palpable. Hemlock stood taller, his arm a reassuring presence around Essie. His gaze, inscrutable, surveyed the assembly. "Acknowledged," he replied, his tone devoid of emotion. "But words alone won't rebuild fences or heal broken faith." He paused, his eyes meeting Agnes's. "Let this be a reminder. Snap judgments are a reckless tool." Gathering courage from Hemlock's steadfastness, Essie found her voice. "People of Harmony Gulch," she stated, her voice ringing with conviction, "I came seeking a new beginning. I know I'm an outsider, different, but I'm also your neighbor. Perhaps, after today, we can cultivate a genuine community." A different quiet descended, one pregnant with tentative hope, replacing the earlier animosity. Slowly, cautiously, townsfolk began to approach. Initial offers of help trickled in, then swelled into a chorus of support. Men volunteered to mend the breached fences, women promised provisions, children even shyly offered wildflowers plucked from the roadside. Agnes Butterfield remained immobile, her face a battleground between ingrained pride and nascent remorse. Finally, she shuffled forward, eyes downcast. "Esmeralda," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. I misjudged you." Essie's smile was radiant, lighting up her entire face. "Thank you, Agnes," she responded. "It takes courage to say that." The following weeks became a blur of communal effort. The townsfolk, driven by a desire to make amends, worked tirelessly alongside Hemlock and Essie. Fences were rebuilt to be stronger than ever. The diversion ditch was reinforced, and the farmhouse, once neglected and decaying, began its transformation back to life. Essie, with her innate entrepreneurial skills and boundless energy, quickly proved invaluable. She optimized the ranch's processes, implemented innovative agricultural methods, and even initiated a small kitchen garden, providing fresh produce for the town's tables. Hemlock, initially wary of her progressive ideas, soon found himself yielding to her resourcefulness and unwavering resolve. Working side by side, their connection grew stronger. The arranged marriage, born out of circumstance, evolved into something deeper. They found solace in each other's company, sharing quiet moments on the porch swing as sunsets painted the sky with fiery hues. Hemlock discovered a capacity for joy he never knew existed, while Essie found a resilience and security she had always yearned for. One evening, as a gentle breeze whispered through the cottonwoods, Essie turned to Hemlock. "Do you ever have second thoughts?" she inquired quietly. "About marrying me, I mean." Hemlock clasped her hand, his rough fingers interlacing with hers. "Regret it?" he said, his voice a resonant murmur. "Esmeralda, you're the best thing that has ever happened to me." Harmony Gulch, too, experienced a rebirth. The prejudice and distrust that had lingered below the surface receded, replaced by a burgeoning sense of unity and inclusivity. The townsfolk learned that judging individuals based on superficial differences robbed them of the opportunity to appreciate the richness and diversity of the human experience. The annual Harmony Gulch Harvest Festival became a testament to this new spirit, a true celebration of community. The scent of spiced apples and roasting turkey hung in the air. Laughter echoed through the town square, and people from all walks of life swayed together beneath a canopy of stars. Agnes Butterfield, beaming with pride, showcased Essie's award-winning zucchini bread at the town fair. As Essie surveyed the joyful scene, her heart overflowed with gratitude. She had arrived seeking a refuge, but she had found something far greater. She had found a vibrant community, a meaningful purpose, and, most unexpectedly, a love that had profoundly reshaped her destiny. And Hemlock, standing close by, his hand a steady presence on her back, was her anchor, her confidant, her home. Indeed, harmony had been restored.